In the wake of the First World War, Germany was left shattered both emotionally and materially. A nation that had once imagined itself destined for greatness suddenly found itself defeated, humiliated, and forced to accept harsh conditions under the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty demanded enormous reparations, stripped Germany of territory, and strictly limited the size of its military. Many Germans felt robbed of their dignity and betrayed by both their leaders and the international community. Into this atmosphere of bitterness, poverty, and instability, a man would rise who promised to restore pride, rebuild strength, and erase the shame of defeat. That man was Adolf Hitler. In the 1930s, he would transform Germany from a wounded nation into a militarized dictatorship, preparing it for yet another devastating war. To understand how this happened, we need to look back at the Germany that existed after the Great War. Everyday life was marked by uncertainty. Hyperinflation wiped out savings overnight, leaving families unable to afford even basic necessities. Wages lost their value so quickly that workers would rush from the factory gates to buy bread before prices went up again. Political factions clashed in the streets. Communists, nationalists, paramilitary organizations, and various political parties fought for control over the direction of the country. The Weimar Republic, Germany's young democracy, seemed too weak to cope with these enormous pressures. Many Germans began to feel that democracy itself was chaotic and unreliable, and some became increasingly open to more extreme alternatives. Adolf Hitler, an Austrian by birth who had served in the German army during the First World War, was one of millions deeply affected by the nation's defeat. For him, the war had been a moment of unity and purpose, and Germany's collapse felt like a personal betrayal. After failing to establish himself as an artist in Vienna and Munich, he turned toward politics, eventually joining a small radical group that would become the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazi Party. Hitler possessed an ability that would change history. He could speak in a way that emotionally overwhelmed his audience. His speeches blended anger, hope, resentment, and nationalism into a powerful message. He promised to tear up the Treaty of Versailles, rebuild the army, restore jobs, and give Germany back its pride. At the same time, he singled out enemies he claimed were responsible for Germany's suffering: communists, democratic politicians, and especially Jews. His message was filled with hatred and conspiracy, but to many people struggling to survive, it sounded like clarity and strength in a world that felt out of control. Around Hitler gathered a group of loyal followers who would help him build his movement into a powerful political machine. Figures such as Hermann Göring, Joseph Goebbels, Heinrich Himmler, Rudolf Hess, and Martin Bormann each played a role in organizing propaganda, creating paramilitary forces, and expanding the reach of the Nazi message. Goebbels, in particular, mastered the use of radio, newspapers, and mass rallies to shape public opinion and glorify Hitler as Germany's savior. Meanwhile, the worldwide Great Depression that began in 1929 plunged Germany into even deeper crisis. Unemployment soared, businesses collapsed, and desperation spread across society. In times of fear, radical solutions often appear more attractive, and the promise of strong leadership appealed to millions of voters. By presenting himself as the only man capable of restoring stability and national pride, Hitler and the Nazi Party steadily gained political influence. Eventually, in 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Almost immediately, he set about dismantling democracy from the inside. Through intimidation, emergency laws, censorship, and the elimination of political opponents, he transformed Germany into a totalitarian state in which opposition was crushed and loyalty to the regime was demanded. The Nazi government invested heavily in rearmament, rebuilding the military in open defiance of the Treaty of Versailles. At the same time, it launched an aggressive campaign of propaganda, portraying Hitler as a visionary leader guiding Germany toward rebirth. Many Germans saw new jobs, new infrastructure, and a sense of national unity, and believed the country was finally recovering from the chaos of the previous decade. But beneath the surface, a dark and violent reality was taking shape. Jewish citizens were gradually stripped of their rights, isolated from society, and subjected to increasingly harsh persecution. Political dissidents, journalists, intellectuals, and anyone considered a threat were arrested, imprisoned, or forced into exile. A climate of fear took hold as the secret police and party organizations monitored and controlled daily life. Germany's transformation from a broken nation into a military powerhouse came at a terrible cost, both to its own people and eventually to millions across Europe. Yet at the time, many ordinary citizens supported Hitler because they believed he had restored their hope and dignity. This combination of economic hardship, political instability, emotional manipulation, and ruthless authoritarianism explains how such a regime could rise so quickly and so completely. What began as a wounded nation seeking recovery became a dictatorship driven by expansion, hatred, and war. The story of Germany in the 1930s is a reminder of how fragile democracy can be, how powerful propaganda is in times of crisis, and how dangerous it becomes when one leader is given absolute power. Hitler's rise was not only the product of his own ambition, but also of a society desperate for change, willing to trade freedom for the promise of national revival. In the end, that decision would lead the world into one of the darkest chapters in human history.